on the pasuk Ze Yitnu Goimer, which says by the Machatzis HaShekel that Hashem is saying this is what they should give, Chazal tell us that Hashem took out like a coin of fire and showed it to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said, Ze Yitnu, this is what they should give a coin like this. What is the difficulty in the Machatzis HaShekel to the extent that Hashem needs to show Moshe Rabbeinu a fiery coin? Tosfos explains that Moshe was surprised and was wondering what could a person possibly give as koifer nafshay, as an atonement for his soul. The pasuk says that the Machatzis HaShekel is going to be an atonement for their souls. Says the Rebbe, this needs explanation. Why should this be such a surprise and such a wonder by Moshe Rabbeinu that giving the Machatzis HaShekel could be an atonement for the nefesh? The Rebbe says every simple city magid, every single magid, a preacher, someone that comes and darshans in town, whose seichel is shaloi be'erech, klal, completely lower than the seichel of Moshe Rabbeinu, who is considered the nivchar, the chosen of all people, someone who understood more than everyone else, who is the ultimate greatness in seichel. So every simple magid who's shaloi be'erech, less than that, will go on and explain it very, very simply. When a yid fulfills a mitzvah, so he deserves and he gets a reward for it, sometimes a very, very great reward. As the pasuk says, Hashem says, if you follow in my mitzvahs, I'll give you rain in its time, all the brachas that are enumerated there. So too in our case, simple explanation. As a reward for fulfilling Machatzis HaShekel, you get koifer nafshi, you get an atonement for the soul. So why should this be such a wonder by Moshe Rabbeinu, to the extent that it's such a great wonder that he totally doesn't understand how this can happen, that the reward for this particular mitzvah is going to be koifer nafshi? We now need to look at the answer of Hashem, which here too it's not understood. What exactly, how Hashem is Hashem answering Moshe Rabbeinu's question? Hashem shows him a coin of fire. So number one, the diuk and matbeya shel eish. Why are we specifically speaking about fire? And the Rebbe says, either way you look at it, there seems to be a problem. If the reason why it says eish, fire, is because all inyanim up above, all of the spiritual things are referred to and are called eish, fire, as it says, Mesharsav eish loyet, his malachim are like a blazing fire, etc. And therefore, whenever Hashem is going to show something, it's going to be in the form of fire, because that's what represents spirituality, etc. So then there's no need to emphasize it specifically here, because anyways, everything above is eish. And if you want to say that if not for the fact that it would say matbeya shel eish, we would have thought that Hashem showed him a coin, literally, a coin made of silver, not a coin made of fire. Similar to when the pasuk says, "V'akei Moises ha-mishkan kemishpato," you'll set up the mishkan according to the way you saw it on the mountain. Moshe Rabbeinu, at least in Pshutei Shel Mikra, was shown the image of a physical mishkan. So there it wasn't a mishkan of fire; it was a physical mishkan. So in other words, if it doesn't necessarily have to be out of fire, so then the question becomes the other way around. So why is Machatzis HaShekel different? That in this case, it was needed that he's shown a coin of fire specifically. Then the Rebbe asks the second question. The Rebbe says, more importantly, where is the answer to Moshe Rabbeinu's question? Moshe Rabbeinu is surprised how giving a Machatzis HaShekel could be koifer nafshay. Well, how is this being answered by Hashem showing him the coin of fire? Says the Rebbe, simply we would be able to say that these two questions regarding Hashem's response, that is, in other words, why we're focusing on the fire aspect, and also how it answers Moshe Rabbeinu's question, these two questions are really answered by each other. Meaning, the answer to Moshe's surprise of how it's possible that giving a Machatzis HaShekel could be an atonement for the person's nefesh, the answer to that is that Hashem is showing him a coin of fire, meaning that when a yid does a mitzvah, and a mitzvah, as the pasuk says, Hashem says, my words are like fire, so Hashem's words, a mitzvah is like fire. So when a person does a mitzvah with a physical coin, especially if he's fulfilling the mitzvah with enthusiasm and fire, the fire of his soul. So then, right now, he has this fire, the fire of the mitzvah, and this is why it could be an atonement for his soul. But the Rebbe says, if that's the case, then the original question comes back even stronger. Then why is Moshe Rabbeinu so surprised by this? In other words, again, this explanation that by fulfilling a mitzvah, you're creating this fire. So again, that's something, a regular drasha by every darshan. This is an obvious thing. And it's not only in regards to machzis hashekel, this is true in regards to all mitzvahs, that when you do a mitzvah, you are bringing about, within this mitzvah, you're bringing about an element of fire, an element of ruchnius. So why is Moshe Rabbeinu so surprised with the idea of machzis hashekel specifically? Furthermore, says the Rebbe, if that's the case, it would have been sufficient that Hashem should just tell Moshe Rabbeinu that through the mitzvah, the coin is becoming like an idea of fire, and therefore there's no need to show it to him. He just could tell it to him. On the contrary, the Rebbe says, seemingly, he should have specifically said it, because that's the way all of Torah and mitzvahs were given to Moshe. Hashem told it to Moshe. So why over here suddenly does Hashem need to take out and show this matbeya shalish, this coin of fire, and say, Zayitnu? From the fact, says the Rebbe, that it's specifically over here that there was needed a special act of Hashem to show the coin of fire and to say, Zayitnu, this is what they should give. That forces us to say that by machzis hashekel there's something unique that does not exist by the other mitzvahs. Says the Rebbe, the point of the explanation is as follows. This is what we could explain. When we speak about the reward of a mitzvah, it could generally be in two ways. Way number one is that the act of the mitzvah is the kind of act that because of the content, the character of the mitzvah itself, it brings, automatically, it naturally brings a particular type of reward. In other words, the reward is a result of the act of the mitzvah. It's a consequence of the mitzvah. Then there's another way in rewards, that the act of the mitzvah itself logically doesn't seem to have any connection with the reward at all. But this is Hashem's rotzeh, this is Hashem's desire to give this particular reward for the fulfillment of this particular mitzvah. The Rebbe says this is true just like in regards to mitzvahs in general. We know that there are certain mitzvahs that we do them without any sort of reason or logic whatsoever. It's only because of Gzeira, Gazarti, Chuka Chakakti, Hashem made a decree. So just like it's in regards to certain mitzvahs like that, the same thing is true with the reward of certain mitzvahs, that it's possible that the reward for certain mitzvahs, even if it's technically a mitzvah like mishpatim, that you could understand the reason for the mitzvah, but it's possible that sometimes the reward will be so great in comparison to the mitzvah itself. And why is that? Just because that's what Hashem wants. Chuka chakakti. Says the Rebbe, now let's apply this idea to the reward of koifer nafshi, of the soul being atoned through the mitzvah of machzis hashekel. The machzis hashekel, what's being given is a physical coin. And yet we're saying it's going to be an atonement for the nefesh, which is something completely spiritual, this kapara for the nefesh. And these two things are completely not be'erech, not comparable to each other. There's no connection between them. They're in fact complete two opposite extremes of each other. The Rebbe explains, as we see this in regards to, when we look at what's the whole purpose of man's creation, is obviously l'shamash is koine, to serve Hashem. So let's now look at the idea of what money is all about and what silver is all about. Money, silver, gold, this is amongst the gashmis, the things itself, from the lowliest of the low. The Rebbe says we see clearly when there's the concept of taivas mammon, people that have a strong temptation and lust and desire for money, how lowly, how low this could lead a person, how low it could bring a person. To the extent we have expressions in the Gemara, Kimlu l'Rabbana, the Chachamim had this halacha, they had this tradition, that ein adam mamid atzmi al mamayni, a person sort of can't even restrain himself or hold himself back when it comes to saving his money. Adam bol al mamayni, a person goes all crazy, loses himself completely when it comes to money issues. So we see how lowly money itself is and where it can lead a person. The Rebbe says this is also expressed in where we find silver and gold in the simple sense. And that is, we know there's the four categories of doimeim, the inanimate, the tzomeach, the plants, the chayin, and the medaber. So the silver and gold is doimeim, it's from the inanimate, and within that itself, it's usually found in the depths of the earth. Tachton, in the lowly, is shein tachton l'matam men, nothing lower than it. And then you have to now start taking it out and refining the silver and the gold, putting it through all the systems to refine it. So that's as far as the one extreme of the money, the silver, and the gold. On the other hand, when we're speaking about koifer nafshay, so any nefesh is already the most greatest and highest thing, especially when we speak about the nefesh of a yid, the soul of a yid, a chelek alikami ma'amamish. So al pi seichel, going back to the original point, it doesn't seem logical at all of giving some physical money, which is again, represents the lowliest of the low, and saying that mitzad, the toicha, mitzad, the content, in other words, the money itself, we can understand, has a connection to koifer nafshe, to atone for the soul, for the chelek alikami ma'amamish, which is the greatest of the great. Logically, that doesn't seem to fit, it doesn't seem to be related to each other and how one can impact the other. Now, even though, of course, being a mitzvah, so like all mitzvahs, it becomes eish, it becomes like fire, ruchnius. But that's something that's not connected with the physical coin itself. The fire is coming because of the mitzvah, because of the ruchnius, the aspect of what's being done. But the coin itself remains a physical coin. And therefore, says the Rebbe, what ends up coming out of this is that the act of the mitzvah itself, in other words, the giving of the physical coin itself, is still not be'erech at all, completely not compared to, and not in any way relatable as far as, again, the content of the idea itself to be able to accomplish something as great as koifer nafshay. And this is where Moshe Rabbeinu's surprise, wonder, or doubt, what he's asking is, coming from the perspective of Moshe's seichel, Moshe's intellect of Torah, it would seem to be that the reward, this koifer nafshe coming for giving the machzis hashekel, is more in that chukah style. It's something that's not within the realms of logic. According to seichel, it's tamua, it's a wonder. That's what Moshe is wondering. And therefore there's room for questioning. It's only that because this is the ratzon of Hashem, Hashem says, chukah chakakti, this is the way I decided, so ein lecha reshus la'areh, you're not allowed to question it. But according to seichel itself, there would be room for not understanding what's going on. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, from the fact that Hashem himself didn't put this into the category of a chukah, machzis hashekel is not a chukah. And as the Rebbe points out in the footnote over here, in the ha'ara, especially that machzis hashekel almost seems to be having a reason. The reason is that it's going to be koifer nafshay. So, in other words, there seems to be an explanation for the mitzvah. The mitzvah is not described as a chukah. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu is wondering, what could a person possibly give for koifer nafshay? Meaning, how could there be an explanation al pi seichel? How can we understand it logically that with a physical coin, the machzis hashekel, this should be an act that's going to bring about koifer nafshay? And this is what Hashem is explaining to him by showing him the matbeya shalish, the coin of fire, and saying ze yitnu, this is what they're going to give. What Hashem is showing Moshe Rabbeinu is that when he didn't give the machzis hashekel, at that point the coin itself, not only because of the ruchnius of the mitzvah that's happening, but the coin itself is now taking on sort of those character traits. It's taking on that form of a matbeya shalish, a fiery coin. In other words, the coin itself is becoming now like a spiritual thing. And therefore, even al pi seichel, we can understand the connection now between the content of the machzis hashekel and the reward of koifer nafshay. If the coin itself became like something spiritual now, it can relate to the spirit of the soul. Whereas by regular tzedakah, where we don't say that necessarily, so then it's not about the coin itself. Rather, as the Chazal say, and it's actually just a very simple logic as well, Chazal say, Hashem says, you have given life to the soul of a poor person, you saved the poor person and his family. So the reward will be that Hashem will save your life and your family's life. Midah keneged midah. But machzis hashekel is clearly something very, very different. From the machzis hashekel, we're going to be making the adonim, the sockets for the Mishkan. And yet here we're saying that there is something that's going to be a koifer nefesh, even if it's something as great as the adonim, it's still a physical thing. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to understand how this works. And that's what Hashem is telling him, that the machzis hashekel itself became like a fiery coin. The machzis hashekel that the Yid is giving. To explain, by the actual fact that Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu this coin of fire and said Ze Yitnu, Hashem is now accomplishing this chiddush, this novelty, which is that the machzis hashekel that the Yidden are giving at the time, and this will obviously continue in future times as well when the Yidden are giving machzis hashekel, is not only giving a physical coin, but actually that they're giving a fiery coin, a spiritual coin. In other words, this is what was neschadish at the time. This is the novelty that happened at the time, that the very coin that Hashem is showing Moshe Rabbeinu, the coin as it's in its root, as it's in its source up above, the Eish, under the Kisei HaKavod. It says Hashem took it out from under the Kisei HaKavod. What does Hashem say? Ze Yitnu, the Yidden are going to give a coin exactly like this. That means Hashem is giving in this, making this power, that when the Yid give a coin, it's not only about the physical coin, but suddenly it's turning into a fiery spiritual coin. In other words, in addition to the fact that a mitzvah, through the actual mitzvah, you're bringing down a concept of Eish, a concept of Ruchnius, which is true for all mitzvahs, but by Machzes HaShekel there's a special chidush that the coin itself is a Matbeya Shalesh. In other words, not only that you brought some Ruchnius into it, but the coin itself is being transformed into a Matbeya Shalesh. And the chidush over here is not that in its source it's a Matbeya Shalesh, in its source it's a coin of fire, because that again would be true for all physical things. Everything comes from its Ruchnius source. But the Ruchnius source, the spiritual source, stays where it is, stays up above, and down here we have the physical item. So rather what we're saying is that even as the coin came down all the way into Olam Hazeh Gashmi, but when we do the mitzvah of Machzes HaShekel, there's like a transformation in this coin now, that in itself, as it's in its physical location down here, it's now Matbeya Shel Eish, in other words, a spiritual, holy Matbeya. Says the Rebbe, based on this we'll also understand the special Chiddush of Machzes HaShekel that needed the special act of Hashem, that Hashem takes out this Matbeya Shel Eish and says Ze Yitnu, and which is something more than what we find by other mitzvahs. Because what we find by other mitzvahs, that a mitzvah draws down a spiritual chayas, a fire, into the physical act, is still in a way that the Gashmi is the object remains down here, removed from its source, removed from the Ruchnius. It's only that in the Gashmis we're bringing down a certain element of Ruchnius. That's the whole idea of Ishtalshlus. Ishtalshlus is that the thing is down here on a much lower level than its source. And sometimes you'll also have that the higher level is shining down all the way down and reaching this lower level as well. But this tachten, this lower thing, is still remaining down at the bottom. It's lower than that higher level. What we're saying by Machzes HaShekel is the Chidush, that the physical coin that the Yidden are giving, it itself is like becoming this fiery coin, the spiritual coin, which is a connection, of course, of two opposite things. And the Rebbe explains, even when we would speak about physical fire of this world, it would be completely the opposite extreme of a matbeya of a coin. As we said before, matbeya is essentially offer, essentially earth, coming from the element of earth and found in the depths of the earth. It's the lowest of the elements. Fire is considered the highest of the elements. And certainly when we speak about Beruchni Yisrael Yonim, we know that the four elements of Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Ofor correspond to the four worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. Ofor, the earth, being the lowest one, corresponding to Olam Asiya. And, of course, the highest world, Olam Atzilus, is the one that corresponds with Te'esh, which is the highest world, the world of Atzilus. So combining these two opposites, the physical coin with that coin of fire, in other words, that highest spiritual level, and especially when we're saying, wasn't a Gashmi fire, which would also be already opposite of a Gashmi coin, but Zeh Yitnu, they're giving the fiery coin of under the Kisei HaKavod. That's completely goes opposite and contrary to everything what Seder Ishtalshlus is about. Seder Ishtalshlus is all about that there's various different levels, and the lower level is Mishtalshal, comes down, evolves out of the higher level, but automatically it means it always remains lower than the higher level. And here, we're suddenly putting the two together. Furthermore, not only is it the opposite of Ishtalshlus, it's opposite of the whole Seder of Torah, and Torah itself is higher than the world, because even in Torah, and even from the Seder in matters of Torah, because the concept of in Torah, there's also this concept of this Hishtalshelus that we're talking about. Like there are the four worlds, we also have in Torah a similar sort of idea. We have the realm of Pshat, which corresponds to the world of Asiya, and it is Hishtalshelus. There's three stages, three steps before that. It's coming down. There's Pshat, Remes, Drush, and Soid. So there's this gap of three levels between the highest level, Soid, which corresponds to Atzilus, and the lowest level of Pshat. So in other words, this lowest level of Asiya is going to be much, much lower than the highest level. And therefore, says the Rebbe, when we have these two opposites coming together, we're taking the doimim, and not only the spiritual doim, the physical coin, and connecting it with the not only regular fire, which is the highest element, but with the spiritual and godly fire. In order to make this combination, this connection of this coin with the fire, that can't be achieved through a malach. That can't be achieved kevayochel, even through Torah. Because all of these are still in a way of ishtalshlus and therefore limited to the realm of ishtalshlus, to the definitions, to the rules of ishtalshlus. Only Hashem himself, who chose with his will, not chas v'shalom that he's forced to, he chose the whole concept of how Seder ishtalshlus should work. And since, of course, Hashem is koil yochel, Hashem could do anything. Nimna nimnois, Hashem could even make opposites come together. So obviously Hashem is also the one that can nullify this whole Seder ishtalshlus, combine these two opposites of Gashmi and Ruchnis, that the physical coin should practically be poil in Olam Hazeh be also not only a physical coin, but a matbeya shalesh, that fiery spiritual coin. Says the Rebbe, so this is the answer of Hashem, what he's telling us in the Medrash. And to use the precise wording of the Medrash. Matbeya shalesh hoitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'amar lo zeh yitnu. Hashem is taking out this coin, and he's saying this is what they should give. So there's 2 points that the Rebbe is making over here. First of all, that we're emphasizing that it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and also that it was an Amira, there was Hashem says this. Because to unite the Gashmis and the Ruchnis, that the physical coin should become a Matbeya Shalesh, this fiery coin, and both of them should be practically at the same time. It's on the one hand kesef, it's silver, and at the same time it's koifer nafshe, it's atoning for the soul. That can be accomplished only by HaKadosh Baruch himself, who in his rotzin, in his desire, he's the one that chose all of Seder Ishtalshalus, and obviously he's not limited by Seder Ishtalshalus, and he could cancel it out. Similar to, says the Rebbe, the whole concept of Bria creation, Yesh Me'ayin, which could only come from the very, very essence of Hashem himself, who Hashem himself is obviously his whole existence. The expression that Alter Rebbe brings in the Tanya is mitziusay me'atzmusay. His existence is from himself. It's not chas v'shalom, based or caused by anything else before him. Chas v'shalom. Hashem is the one and only, and therefore he is the one, the only one that could create Yesh Me'ayin. Says the Rebbe, just like in creating Yesh Me'ayin, how did the creation come about? That was through Hashem's speech. Through 10 utterances, Hashem created the world. Or as the Pasuk says, B'dvar Hashem Shemayim Nasu, Hashem created the heavens with the word of Hashem. In a similar way is this idea that Hashem is making now, that the physical coin is also at the same time becoming a fiery coin. That's also happening through the Dibur of Hashem. As we said before, Hashem said, Zeh Yitnu, that the Matbeya Gashmis that the Yitn are going to give, Yitnu, is also going to be at the same time, Eish is going to be fire. Zeh, they're going to give exactly the same coin like Hashem has. In other words, that speech of Hashem itself created this ability, this chidush, similar to the creations and the Sheishis and Bereshis through the words of Hashem. Says the Rebbe, seemingly we could still ask. Once again, certainly, Moshe Rabbeinu himself also knew, even before Hashem shows him this Matbeya Shalesh, that Hashem could surely combine opposites. From this itself we understand that if Hashem could connect any opposite, so Hashem could also connect this Gashmi coin with its spiritual source on the fire. So we're back to square one. What was Moshe Rabbeinu's great surprise? What could a person give for koifer nafshe, for atonement of his soul? So the Rebbe says there's a number of ways of answering this. And the Rebbe says, umehen, meaning two of the ways, two of the answers. Number one, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu knows that Hashem could do it. But in the level of chachma, of seichel, of intellect, of kedusha, which is Moshe, this kind of concept needs to be actually surprising. It's only because it's a chukah, so practically he's not going to question it. But you can't say it's a mishpat, you can't say it's in the realm of mishpatim or edis, of the kind of things that are logically understood. So in other words, that's the pshat that Moshe Rabbeinu was wondering. In other words, according to the rules of logic, it doesn't really work. That's number one. Point number two, says the Rebbe. As we said before, Hashem never defined the idea of machzis hashekel as a chukah. And therefore, certainly there is some sort of explanation over here for Moshe Rabbeinu's wonder and Moshe Rabbeinu's question. And the mitzvah of machzis hashekel, generally, as we said before, is generally within the hishtalshlus of Torah and mitzvahs. And again, it's not in the category of a chukah. And therefore the Rebbe says, that's the diuk what the Medrash says, and the answer that the Medrash says, Kemin matbeya shel eish, that like a coin of fire, Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu. Which is, in order to remove Moshe's question, Moshe's wonder, it wasn't sufficient just to tell it to Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem could do it all, because then the surprise or the wonder in Moshe Rabbeinu's mind still remains. It's still something that cannot be understood logically. And therefore, what needs to be is hero that Hashem actually shows it to him. In other words, that this act, this physical coin, at the same time also becoming a fiery coin, should be in a way of re'iyah, should be in a way that you see it. In other words, that's in an open, a revealed way. As the pasuk says, zeyitnu, where you like point with your finger and see it, right here it is. In other words, so it doesn't remain just completely something that's not understood. When you see something, it's a totally different story. Furthermore, this gili is not only by Moshe, but for all Yidden, that their nisin, their giving, becomes in a way of zeyitnu. That the coin that they give, in there it's also in a revealed way, that it's zed, that it's a fiery coin. The Rebbe is quoting Tosfos over here, that Moshe Rabbeinu saw this coin to be able to see it well, and through that give it over to the Yidden. So this is also not only for Moshe, but to the Yidden as well. Says the Rebbe, to add some more explanation in the idea of Matbeya Shel Eish, focusing on this fiery idea aspect specifically. Because seemingly, we could still ask, in order to emphasize that the coin that the Yidden are giving is not a physical coin, but it's also that spiritual coin that's under the Kisei HaKavod, we don't necessarily have to describe it as fire specifically. We find, even Lamaila, there are things, for example, like Mayim, there's also water, Mechol is called the Sar Shal Mayim, etc. In other words, there's other elements besides fire as well. So what's this emphasis specifically of a coin of fire? Says the Rebbe, we could explain it, that through this, that Hashem was showing him, and through that accomplishing, that the idea that the giving of the Machzas HaShekel should be not only a spiritual idea, but within spirituality itself, specifically the idea of fire. Why fire? Says the Rebbe, the difference between fire and the other elements of afar, dust, water, wind, as they are in the literal sense down here, which from that we also understand in regards to their source Beruchnius, is that the other elements are either going downwards, pulling downwards, or at the very most, staying at the same level. We know that the whole idea of Eish is that it's constantly trying to go up, trying to go back up to its source, to the extent that we need to put in special effort, like putting a wick or something like that, to make sure the fire stays down. So Hashem is showing Moshe Rabbeinu Matbeya Shel Eish that the giving of the Machzas HaShekel through the Yidden is not only about giving a spiritual coin, but within that itself specifically fire. In other words, it has that characteristic of fire to constantly be going higher and higher, increasing and going higher within Kodesh, within Kedusha, greater and greater. And this makes it even more geschmack, more understandable, how a physical coin could accomplish Kofar Nafshoy, because it has this characteristic of fire, which shows that it's constantly striving to go higher, to remove itself from its materialistic state, and striving to go to spirituality, getting higher and higher. And the Rebbe finishes off with a fascinating Hayroi in Avodas Adam. The Rebbe says, even though, of course, the giving of Machzas HaShekel was mainly in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, when you needed to give the Machzas HaShekel for the Karbanos Tzibur, the communal Karbanos of the whole year, nevertheless, we know that these days there's also a Minig Yisrael to give before Purim the Machzas HaShekel, just before we daven Mincha, day before Purim. And we give a half of the coin that is the coin of the currency of the time. And we give it a Zeichel Machzas HaShekel, which would be given in Adar. We also give 3 Machzas HaShekels, the minig is, because it says 3 times the word Teruma in the Parsha. In addition to this, says the Rebbe, since every single year has a spiritual Mishkan and Migdash, as we know, the Pasuk says, V'shachanti b'soicham, Hashem says, I'm going to rest inside of them. It doesn't say inside of it, the Beis HaMikdash. But b'soicham means inside of each and every year. So we understand that there's the concept of the giving of the Machzas HaShekel Beruchnius, from which the sockets of the Mishkan were made, again of the spiritual Mishkan in each and every one of us. So here we have the Hayrah of this idea of Zeyitnu, the fiery coin. That when a Yid give a coin for a mitzvah, for tzedakah, and so too when we appease a poor person with words, when we try to comfort him, physical words through our 5 through the parts in our mouth, the 5 physical parts in our mouth where the different letters come from. It's not only about the physical coin or the physical speech, the words that we're saying, but at the same time, there's also that fiery coin. In other words, there's an Inyan of Ruchnius, an Inyan of Kedusha. And within that itself, the characteristic of fire, which nature again is, to go upwards. And from Machzas HaShekel, we learned a lesson for all mitzvahs as well. That every single act of a Yid, in all matters of Torah and mitzvahs, even though, yes, came down into physical objects. We do tzitzis with physical wool, tefillin with physical parchment, and so too regarding the rest of the mitzvahs. But it's not only about the physical act of the mitzvah, but it's a matbeah shel eish, it's a fiery coin. It's an Inyan of ruchnis, it's an Inyan of kedusha. And from this we can also understand the greatness of having chayis, warmth, fire, a fire of kedusha in the avodah of a Yid in all matters of Torah and mitzvahs, so that in every single act that he does, it should be noticeable that it's a coin of fire. Till finally we could fulfill the command of eish tamid, tukad ala mizbeach. The fire should constantly be burning on that mizbeach. And again, to us it means inside of our hearts. Lo yisichba should never ever be extinguished.